The Autumn Republic is the final book in Brian McClellan's Powder Mage trilogy. I've really enjoyed my time with the characters and the world, and I wouldn't hesitate to read the books again. However, the big issue I had with Promise of Blood creeps back into the Autumn Republic, and while the trilogy's conclusion is satisfying, it's not completely effective, leaving me with some mixed opinions. The Autumn Republic has Tamis return from behind enemy lines and resume command of the Adran army, and he is more determined than ever to push the Kez out of his country. After one of the candidates in Adro's very first election is almost assassinated, Adamat is hired to find the perpetrator, but he discovers a secret that could be the undoing of the entire world. Taniel devotes himself to protecting Kapol at all costs, for her sorcery may be the only thing that can defeat the so-called gods. The world has expanded since the first book, and you really get the impression that the trilogy has only scratched the surface of a vast globe. The battles are intense and engaging, and it's fascinating to see how the magic system is incorporated into an army and how the different abilities counter and interact with each other. Glimpses of how the privileged are recruited and trained give you an insight into their brutal nature, and the mechanics of their sorcery is finally explained, a detail I would have liked to have in an earlier book. I could read about the three main characters, Tamis, Adamat, and Taniel, all day long, and even though it took a little while to get to know them, I would definitely read more about Bo, Kapol, and Alam. The interactions between these characters are realistic, authentic, and believable, and makes for some great storytelling. One of the reasons the Crimson Campaign was a better book than Promise of Blood was the more focused plot and pacing. These elements in the Autumn Republic don't devolve to the level of the first book, but there are some definite bumps along the way to the trilogy's conclusion. Some plot twists are not effectively set up, so they seem to come out of nowhere, and they give the impression the author added twists just for the sake of having them and not for the purpose of serving the story. The two main narratives in this trilogy, the war with the Kez and the return of the world's so-called gods, were weaved together in the first two books very well, but in the Autumn Republic, one of them is resolved abruptly and too easily, and then the other jumps to the forefront like it had been the driving conflict from the beginning, even though it was not sufficiently established and foreshadowed for that position. Valora finally gets a chance to justify her existence, and I have to admit, the minimal glimpses in this book had me warming to her character, unlike in the Crimson Campaign when I hoped a powder keg would explode in her face. Having completed the trilogy, I think Valora's character could have been very effective, but the execution failed to live up to the ambitious idea. We are told throughout this trilogy that Valora has a family-like relationship with Tamis and Taniel, but we are very rarely shown this, and by the time we are, it's far too little and far too late. Having Valora trying to regain the trust of Tamis and Taniel while still fighting side by side with them, and then coming to terms with the fact that things can't go back to how they were, would have been a great character arc. If the Valora of the Autumn Republic had been present in the first two books, where she barely exists and plays the victim card, the redeeming qualities of her character could have balanced the selfish act she was introduced with, but as it stands, she could be removed from the trilogy and no one would notice. I did like Neela and her character arc, but said arc comes out of nowhere. She had so few point-of-view chapters in Book 1 and 2, and so few interactions with the main characters, that I wondered why pages had been given to her at all. She probably has 3 times as many point-of-view chapters in this book than in the other two combined. She gets more chapters than Taniel. This very unbalanced progression of her arc could be the simple result of the author having to prioritize the main plot, and rightly so, but it did make Neela's entire character feel like a last-minute addition, especially since the main aspect of her arc is never explained by the author or questioned by the characters. It doesn't absolutely need an explanation, but considering the depth of the world building and that Taniel's enhanced abilities do have an explanation, the lack of one here is a glaring oversight. Romance was touched upon in the other books, but in the Autumn Republic there are 2 situations that border love triangle territory. These situations never progressed that far, but that's what they brought to mind, and I absolutely despise love triangles. I don't have a problem with romantic relationships in my fantasy. I honestly like when there is at least one. But having so much attention given to the romance in this book when it had had a minimal but satisfactory presence in the first 2 had me rolling my eyes and wanting to skip ahead to the next battle. That being said, a certain romantic relationship that felt very forced in the Crimson Campaign develops much more naturally in this book, and the chapters involving these 2 characters were enjoyable instead of awkward. As far as mature content goes, it's comparable to the other 2 books, so a solid PG-13, with the descriptive battles accounting for most of that rating. The Autumn Republic succeeds in bringing the Powder Mage trilogy to a satisfying conclusion and giving the characters a worthy send-off. Overall, the trilogy is a fun, fast read with some excellent characters and spectacles, and the world is one I would happily visit again. It is flawed, but the positives outweigh the negatives. And there is magic and guns. Magic and guns are always a good combination.